with different pastors and youth pastors. A couple of years ago, I sat down with he was the youth overseer for a major Christian denomination in Canada. And I told him about this statistic, and I explained to him, well, I'm talking to many...
60 to 70%.
Yeah, I told him, you know, I'm seeing this stat, I'm talking to many pastors, many youth pastors, and people are saying, yeah, this seems to be holding out. You're a leader of leaders in this denomination. What do you see? And he said, Cal, in our denomination, it's about 80%.
80%.
Now,
that's amazing.
I point out to people, if you had a wound and you were losing 70% of your blood, you probably want to do something about it fast, you know.
So there's a problem here. What's the solution? Stay tuned for the answers.
Can you marry your relative? According to the Bible, all people on earth go back to Noah's family, and before that, back to Adam and Eve. Since we all are ultimately the descendants of the same parents, all people are related. You have to marry your relative. If you don't, you marry something that isn't human. Of course, today, we don't marry our close relatives for legal and biological reasons. We marry someone further away in relation to us.
One of the reasons that the Creation Answers book is one of the most popular creationist books in the world is because it covers a huge range of topics. The Creation Answers book answers more than 60 of the most asked questions about Genesis and the creation evolution issue. Questions like, does God exist? Are the days in Genesis 1 real days? What about carbon dating? How can we see light from stars millions of light years away in a young universe? Where did Cain get his wife? Where did all the water from Noah's flood come from? And where did it go? How did all the animals fit on board Noah's Ark? Was there an ice age? Where do dinosaurs fit into the Bible? And many, many more. Published by Creation Ministries International, it has been continually updated for more than 2 decades as science progresses and we learn more about God's amazing creation. For many people, the Creation Answers book has been a great place to begin learning about the creation evolution issue. This book is excellent for Christians struggling with their faith, for students looking for alternatives to evolution, for pastors looking for a summary of the evidences for creation, for evolutionists looking for a clear presentation of creationist thinking. To order your copy, visit www.creationontheweb.org or call the CMI office nearest you.
And we've been talking about how, people seem to be accepting these notions of that some scientists are presenting with a different history of the universe, of how we got here, question number 1.
Right.
And I always like to point out to people that really this isn't a question of science versus faith. This is more of a faith versus faith issue.
It really is.
Yeah, because we're talking about something that happened in the past. No one was there except for God, in my opinion, and so because of that, we're making guesses about what happened in the past. But there's a couple of quotes I like to use when I'm speaking, just to remind people of this. This was George Wald, and he was a Nobel Prize winner for medicine in 1967.
And an evolutionist, right?
An evolutionist, yes. And he wrote a book, Frontiers of Modern Biology, on the theories of the origin of life. So he's talking about the theories of the origin of life.
Okay.
But he makes this very honest statement, and he says, I don't want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible, spontaneous generation leading to evolution.
Well, that's an interesting admission, isn't it?
It certainly is, and he's writing this book on biology, but he must recognize the fact there's only two solutions to question number 1, either God created or we evolved. He's rejecting, he just says, I don't want to believe in God, probably because of the moral implications of if God created, he's probably got some rules, and perhaps you should follow them.
Well, it's interesting also that he points out the evolutionary impossibility of he calls it spontaneous generation. Of course, that reminds us of Pasteur and the life begets life principle, of course, in biology.
Yeah, the fact is nobody's ever observed something spontaneously coming to life out of nowhere.
That's right.
We see life from life. But
we have stories about it, but no one's observed it.
That's right. Now, here's another quote that I like to use, and this is from Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins is he's a prolific writer. He's a very charismatic man. He's on tour right now in the States promoting his new book, The God Delusion, I understand. And so he's an evolutionist, and he just has a position that, you know, if you believe in God, you're deluded. And he makes this statement in an interview in 1996 with Lanny Swerdlow. He said, "You cannot be both sane and well-educated and disbelieve in evolution." He says the evidence is so strong that any sane, educated person has got to believe in evolution.
So he's saying, what's he saying about us then?
Well,
I don't believe in evolution.
No,
I like
I guess,
to think I'm educated.
I would say by that statement you're insane and you're uneducated.
Yeah, I guess, according to Dawkins, right?
But it's interesting, I got this quote, and this was from World Magazine in 1997. So a year later, and Dr. Dawkins is he's at Washington University doing a speech, and he's explaining his intellectual commitment to Darwinian evolution as the, you know, explanation of human origins. And he made this statement 1 year later. He said, "We don't need evidence; we know it to be true."
Oh, okay. So now we've gone from, if you're well educated, you got to be insane not to believe evolution, to we don't need evidence, we just believe it.
Right. Now, as a Christian, if I, you know, somebody asked me to defend my faith, like 1 Peter 3:15 says, and I said, well, I don't have a defense for my faith, I just believe it. I don't really need evidence. You know, typically you would get the response, well, you see, that's a blind faith, and you just believe it because maybe your mom and dad told it to you or something like that. But see the switch up here. The evidence is so important, but we don't need evidence because we know it to be true. We're going from a faith position to, is there really that much evidence for evolution?
One of the key things that we need to talk about is different types of science.
Right.
Right? And we've hinted at this already a little bit. There are different types of science. There's the good kind of science, experimental science or operational science, we refer to it that way.
Right.
And that's the kind of science that's done in a lab where scientists can go and you can repeat your observations over and over again.
Right. And that's how we get things like scientific theories. So if I believe, you know, I get hit on the head with an apple, and then I think, well, maybe there's this force that somehow pulls objects towards, you know, centers of large masses, and gravity, then I can take out a penny, and I could do it now, and we could repeat the experiment.
Or you could let yourself get hit by an apple many times and measure that, and then come up with an explanation for how that happens.
So I start with my hypothesis, and then I could actually bring that to the point of a scientific theory. Right.
Right. And that kind of science leads to technological advancements like these television cameras and lights and computers and so on. It's good stuff.
Right.
As we do that kind of science on living things, we discover how we work, how our eyes work, or whatever. We can improve our standard of life.
Right.
That's one of the goals of science. Good stuff.
Yep.
It leads to those advancements in technology and also medical advancements. We can ease pain and suffering for folks who have medical conditions.
But there's another type of history of science, right? And you'll hear people make statements like, you know, well, we've measured this amount of sedimentation here, therefore millions of years ago, and a lot of people don't catch that that concept that they just went from, okay, we're measuring something in the present, to therefore millions of years. They just jumped a boundary there. Maybe you can talk about that.
We kind of call that origin science or historical science, where you're looking at things that are happening in the present, like, as you mentioned, sedimentary deposits. A certain rate is accumulated over so many years or whatever. And then you have to make up, you observe that in the present, but then you look at, for example, the strata in Grand Canyon, and you're saying, well, what we observe today, that's always gone on, and so we make up a story, a history about Grand Canyon.
Right.
Fossils are a great example. We've got a fossil here. This is a piece of dinosaur bone. And if you'd go out and find this in the field, you'd have to... we could do experimental science on this, right? We could grind it up. We could do a chemical analysis on it, figure out what it's made out of, and so on. But to be honest, that's pretty boring. What we want to know about the fossil is, when did it live? When did it die? How fast did this animal run? What did it eat? What was its social interaction with those other animals over there? And then the fossil becomes interesting.
Right.
But that's an interpretation. We don't directly observe what the animal was eating. I mean, it's dead, right?
That's right.
All of the evidence scientists or anyone ever has exists in the present. This fossil exists now, in my hand, in the present. We never have the past, ever.
Right.
We make up stories about the past to explain the evidence which only exists in the present. A key point for people to understand.
Because I was out doing we were in the Badlands last year in Alberta, and we went out, and sure enough, we found bones in the rock. but they didn't come with little tags on them saying, oh, I'm 165 million years old.
Right.
The fact was there was a bone in a rock. Your interpretation of how old it was or how it died or how it got there, that's your origin science that you were talking about.
Right. And the biases or the starting assumptions, the history that the particular paleontologist accepts as fact, either the millions of years history
Right.
or the biblical history, those are going to color his interpretations of whatever he finds in the present.
Right.
If you believe by faith, and it is a faith position,
Yeah.
it's not that evolution is science, this is what we're trying to refute here. Evolution is not science, the belief about the past. It's a
Right.
certain history, a certain way of looking at the past. Creation, that's a certain history as well.
Yeah.
We have the history that's laid out for us in the Bible. Now, if we were to compare these two different histories that scientists and observers use to interpret all the facts around us, rocks, fossils, trees, where did they come from,
Right.
the diversity in the animal kingdom, etc., we Christians have an advantage over our evolutionary colleagues. And I like to say this to folks when I go out and speak in churches all across Canada and
Right.
so on, because we have the Bible.
Right.
It's not like the evolutionists who make up their history about the past. We have a written revelation from someone who was there, an eyewitness
actually
account,
there.
who was there, wrote down for us what happened,
Right.
and he wouldn't lie. God doesn't lie. And if we base all of our thinking on that history, we have the hope of interpreting the data correctly. It's an important point for us to get a grasp on.
And it's important for Christians to understand that, Jesus seemed to refer to this history as fact when he was teaching. For example, we were talking earlier about, doctrines and some of the challenges that Christian faith is dealing with. And really we're talking about a foundational issue here. If you were to discuss something like marriage with somebody, I mean, and Jesus did, he's always debating the Pharisees, and they came to him asking about divorce. Well, it's interesting what he did. He actually referred to where marriage came from to give them an answer about the elimination or the end of marriage.
That's right.
Matthew 19:4-6, he says, "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." He quotes from Genesis 1, Genesis 2 as literal history and says, you want to know about the end of marriage? I'm going to tell you it's precious in God's sight because he ordained it. Right back there, it's a foundational issue in Genesis.
The meaning of marriage goes back to Genesis, the very first marriage, where it's one man for one woman for life.
That's right. Now, evolutionary history, interesting. There was a study done by some evolutionists, and they wanted to know about the end of marriage too. And they came back after their study and they said the reason people get divorced after 3 or 4 years is because that's the long that the gorillas can be together. And this was
Using the animal kingdom to justify divorce.
They're using the exact same logic as Jesus. Find out about the origin of something, it'll tell you where you're coming from.
And other doctrines like the 7-day week and so on, we'll talk about those when we come back, and some other things as well, how they relate to the gospel.
If God didn't create the sun until day 4, how could each of the previous 3 days have been real days? Although we are not told what the light source was, the Bible says that God created the earth and light on the first day. Thus, we can deduce that on the first 3 days, the earth was already rotating in space relative to God's created light, enabling a day-night cycle. In the book of Revelation, we read that in the future new heavens and earth there will once again be no need for sun.
When Dr. Carl Whelan started Creation magazine in his home in 1978, little did he realize that today it would reach into some 140 countries all around the world and have such a huge impact in so many lives. This unique 56-page, full-color family magazine refutes evolution and gives God the glory for the amazing creation we see all around us. It gives you the answer to defend your faith and uphold the true history of the world found in Genesis. Creation magazine is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page in Creation magazine is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, it is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. The exciting articles also provide great witnessing material that you won't find anywhere else. Many have come to faith in Christ because of subscribers sharing this magazine with them. So subscribing not only boosts your faith, it enables you to get biblical truth into your community in a special way. Subscribe today and have it delivered to your home every 3 months.